I wanted to see a video.
For the music and,
Yeah, we should. You caught me off guard.
And I told you I got rid of it.
Well, I know, but I thought you were going
Well, I
to.
was trying to find a video real quick that I could play, but it's such a depressing topic. I could not find a kid's video. I wanted to play on that.
Well, there's that. Give me a moment to get myself together then, because I was, like I say, I was caught off guard. Doo-doo-doo-doo. All right. So, will you pray with me, please? Holy One, loving Counselor, may our words and thoughts harmonize with your words and thoughts. Give us the grace to understand, with hearts like yours, full of grace and mercy. In all your names, amen.
Amen.
So we were just talking about November 30th being the end of November and the beginning of, starting to get ready for Christmas and Lent and Advent and so on. So we are coming to the close of the Christian year. There is a cycle in the year, as some of you know. And next Sunday is the end of that cycle. It ends on Reign of Christ Sunday, when we remember, or think about Jesus returning. And the new year, the new Christian year, begins with the first Sunday in Advent. And Advent is the 4 Sundays before Christmas. So December 1st is also Advent 1 this year. So we are coming to the end of that Christian year. And the readings become more and more apocalyptic. And I mean that quite literally. These readings this week and especially next week, they're full of imagery around the end times. Visions of fear and war and pestilence, of oppression and death and judgment. Somehow, being November in the Northern Hemisphere, it feels rather appropriate as we're looking forward towards winter. But these texts have been used within the Christian church as a means of warning. Whenever there's been war, from the early days of the church to the present. And currently, they're often cited by certain fundamentalist Christian denominations as almost blueprints for the final days and the return of Christ, which they see coming on pace. Many traditions look forward, actually, to that event. Terrifying as it may seem to the rest of us, these traditions look forward to it as a fulfillment of prophecy, as the perfecting of creation, as the time when they and those like them will be lifted immediately to eternal bliss, the rapture, right? And so they want those days to come soon. This is why many fundamentalist groups support the nation of Israel so fiercely. It's not because, or not entirely because of political reasons. It's because some interpretations of those texts, as well as other texts in the book of Revelation, for example, indicate that Israel must become a major power and go to war against the adversary, which is defined different ways in different readings and so on, interpretations, so that identity is vague. But the adversary at Megiddo, which is identified as being a place in Israel, within Israel, a plain of Megiddo, which is where the term Armageddon comes from. Right? So with that battle and that defeat comes the end of the world as we know it, and the return of Christ and the rapture of the blessed, and so on and so forth. And there are other signs, mostly from Revelation, but you'll hear people talking about them as well. People having numbers on their forehead or being given numbers, which is why way back when there was a lot of resistance to Social Security numbers. The rise of Rome and so on. So these traditions read these texts quite literally. And if you're interested in reading more about this and some refutation and discussion and analysis, I can recommend a book. It's titled In God's Time by Craig Hill. He was a professor of mine at Wesley. He grew up in a fundamentalist tradition, which literally believed in many of these things, but as he studied and read the text and went through seminary himself, he's now a New Testament scholar of note, especially of the letters of Paul and Revelation. He left that understanding and returned to the words of Jesus as reflected in his book's title. He examines and puts aside all those claims of those groups explaining why they were wrong. For example, the texts were written for the people of the early church who were facing, in fact, persecution. They were metaphorical and allegorical, and they were not to be taken literally, and so on. But one of his central tenets, reading as a Christian, as a progressive Christian, is the simple declaration of Jesus that no one knows when he will return. Only God. Jesus doesn't know the disciples. Jesus doesn't know the disciples can't learn it. No human will ever know. It will happen when it happens, and quite suddenly, without warning. Jesus says two people will be grinding corn together, and one will be taken and the other left. Two people will be in a field, and one will be taken and the other left. If anyone had known, then they would have prepared for it, but we do not know. Jesus says it will happen in God's time. And currently, there are those who would take these texts as a reflection of modern politics in the West as well. That Christians are being persecuted and oppressed and denied the ability to practice their faith. A simple look around proves the falsity of that, I think, at least in the Western world of Europe and the Americas, much of Africa and Australia. It's true that some individual nations have state religions that do not allow other faiths, or maybe any faith, to be practiced there, but there's very, very few of them. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, Egypt, China, North Korea, those are the ones that come to mind first. But in countries such as South Africa, Kenya, France, Bolivia, Mexico, Russia, the US, of course, the Philippines, India, Christianity of some form is either the dominant faith or is well recognized and tolerated. Recognizing other faiths is not oppressive to Christianity. I think we can all agree on that. So rather than see these readings as terrifying predictions of reality, much less trying to apply them to our own times, I think we can see them as ways to understand our lives when our lives seem to be falling apart. When it feels like our personal world is coming to an end, when there are wars and rumors of war, and we don't know which way to turn or how things can possibly get better, there is the reassurance that God has things under control, that all is not truly lost, that God will lift us up and help us. We've all had times like that in our lives because we're human, sometimes more than once. There's loss of a relationship, unemployment, maybe coming out, the death of a loved one, a parent, a partner, a sibling, or other health issues can all be stand-ins for the end of the world, can't they? Because they're world-changing. They are indeed the end of our world as we know it. We have to adjust to a new reality. Life without that partner. Life with the chronic illness, or life as we really are. Often that change, that end of the world, is not what we wanted. We grieve the loss of what we knew. And that's why coming out is both exciting, woohoo, yippee, and finally free to be all of me, and also very scary. How do I adjust? Who do I tell or not tell? Will I lose my job or not be able to find one? What will my friends and family say? And so on. But change can also be exciting in that way. A relationship that was no longer nourishing for either person. The opportunity to try a new career, to move to a new place, to meet the challenge of a new way of living. not easy. It's not, I'll never say it's easy, but there's the possibility of hope and newness. When I was in my mid-30s, I left a job under, let's say, less than ideal circumstances. I found another one right away, but that loss made me think about what I was doing and why I was unhappy in the position. And that reflection woke me to the fact that I was not doing what I loved. I was doing what seemed logical and productive, and I was capable of it, and I could find work in it, and I was reasonably successful at it. But it didn't move me, and it showed in my performance. And so I had to change, and I went to seminary. That loss, that change in my world, gave me the opportunity to reshape my life, to go in a different direction. It indeed felt at the time like the end of the world. But once I was able to pick myself up and look around, I realized I had been given another chance, another opportunity. Now, these second chances aren't all sweetness and light, of course. Just because we take that new opportunity and embrace the options and move forward, that doesn't guarantee that we will get what we had hoped for or even what we planned for. When I went into seminary, my thinking was I was going to be a United Methodist pastor. I would be going into the comfortable routine of the appointment system, where you're sent to a church and you're there for 5 or 10 years, and then they send you to another one, and you work your way up through the ranks, and you get a comfortable pension and parsonage maybe, and you retire at 72 or whatever, and you're all taken care of. But that's not what happened. Seminary led me almost directly to coming out, which meant a transfer to MCC, which is a whole nother world change, right? The point is, we all have so many times in our lives when life itself feels overwhelming. The changes, the new stuff we have to deal with, decisions that have to be made when we feel least equipped to make them. But these texts from Isaiah and from Luke are telling us that we aren't facing all that uncertainty alone. God is with us. God will guide us. We may feel abandoned, neglected, unloved, but we're not. God's strength and love are with us always. So when we face that end of our world, we can take a deep breath and move forward, trusting in God's presence at all times. In all God's names, amen.
Amen.
So let us know so that we can...
What day is that again?
Friday, June 5th
It's 7 o'clock.
at 7 o'clock.
It's fun. It's fun.
For those of you who don't know, that's the women's basketball team.
Women's and
The WNBA.
WNBA.
And where's that at though?
Wintrust Arena. It's down like by McCormick Place.
Yeah, and we can do carpooling down there.
Yeah.
All right. Will you pray with me, please? God, who is present on mountaintops and in small churches, in prisons and in mansions, in vet clinics, in gardens, on farms, and in bars, remind us of your presence with us, not only today, but always. May we speak and hear with your love for all mortals. In all your names, amen.
Amen.
So here we are at the second mountain in our Lenten tour of biblical mountains. Last week we were on Ararat, which was the place of new beginnings, where Noah's Ark came to rest after the flood, and humanity was given a fresh start after that flood. Today we are at the mountain of Moriah, which we're calling the Mountain of Obedience. Both the story of Abraham and Isaac and the idea of obedience are difficult topics. We think of obedience and we tend to say, well, but sometimes it's a good thing to disobey, and obedience sounds like, being a dog and, just doing whatever you're told and that kind of thing. And then the whole Abraham and Isaac story, as Kathy said, is very problematic and difficult. And there's a lot we could unpack about it. I've talked about it in the past. How did Isaac react to the whole thing? His own, we don't know how old he was exactly, but old enough to walk and carry wood, so he wasn't a teeny baby. His own father, who had doted on him as his only son, only child, had been ready to kill him. I'm sure that had an effect on their continuing relationship. Right? Quite aside from that logistical question of how was Abraham able to get him onto the altar in the first place? Because the story says that he was bound and laid on the altar. Well, what did he do to Isaac to get him to do that, right? How did he get him tied up and put on the altar? So Abraham, what did God's command to him do to his relationship, not only with Isaac, but with Sarah, his wife, the mother, Isaac's mother? I'm sure that she did not know what was going on before they left, because otherwise there would be a very different ending to the story, right? And his relationship with God, Abraham's relationship with God. How do you deal with someone, a being that you believe is all good and beneficent, and yet asks you to do something so terrible? And besides that, those human relationships, what does it say about God? What kind of deity asks for a child's death? And that must have been what Abraham was asking himself, right? Now that's that whole, what in theological terms is called theodicy, the problem of good and evil. How can God be good and yet ask for something so terrible? The traditional exegesis or analysis goes usually one of two ways. One is that either Abraham was so rigidly obedient to God that he trusted God even when God issued such a terrible command. That he trusted that there must be something good going to be coming out of this. The other is that Abraham trusted that God wouldn't actually allow him to carry that out. That he knew, quote unquote, that God was good and that God would somehow work things out so that that would not happen. It's a knotty question, and it's not really where I want to go today. I talked about it a little bit, but I don't really want to go into depth. We've discussed it before. As I said, my understanding personally, in a nutshell, is that Abraham trusted that God had another plan, in spite of how it looked on the surface. That he knew God as beneficent and caring and nurturing, and so this was not in keeping with God's character, and so his trust was that there would be another plan. Now, Jesus, in our other reading, on the unnamed mountain of the transformation, also heard God's command. Now, it wasn't as defined as Abraham's command from God, but it was nevertheless clear. Jesus was the beloved child of God, and the disciples were to listen to him. Now, this implies that that there is something that he's going to be saying that they need to listen to, right? So the implication is that he's taking that message of love, you are my beloved child, and sharing it with the world. He isn't told how, and that's last week we talked about how Jesus went into the wilderness to figure out just exactly what his mission was and how he was to share that message. But that was what he was to do. Now, the basic point in either case is trusting God's command. Now, that to me begs the question, what is God's command? If you're going to follow it, you got to know what it is. And Abraham seems to have heard the divine order directly, whereas Jesus inferred it. God's well-loved child used to spread the news of God's love and grace to the world. Well, my friends, that's what we do too. There are the 10 Commandments, of course, which tell us how to live with God and our neighbor. And there's the word that Jesus gives his followers, love one another as you have loved me. And there's the great commandment as well, love God and your neighbor as yourself. There's a thread running through all of these. Love and care for each other, connection to the community and one another, building others up, or at least not tearing them down. It's based on trust in each other and God. It's based on faith, not fear. Look, there is a lot of fear and a lot to fear in the world. Illness, loss of employment, loss of loved ones, loneliness, being the target of hatred or simple bigotry. There's all kinds of things to fear. But if we live in fear, we deny our humanity and that of others. And so we act with courage, loving others through wanting and working for everyone to have a decent wage, adequate health care, the ability to follow their chosen spiritual path, safe places to live and to go to school, emotional support, and a caring environment to grow up in. Call it what you will, but in simple, pragmatic terms, it makes sense to have a healthy society where everyone is well-nourished, housed, receiving medical care, educated to their desired level, and able to pursue their chosen spiritual path. In spiritual terms, we call that justice, right? Justice. And the prophet Micah said, this is my, what some people call a life verse. This is my guiding principle. What does the Holy One require of you but to do justice, love mercy, and walk in fellowship with the divine? And that's how we know an action, a desire, a law, a rule, a regulation, a policy is right. Because it leads us to care for those in need, to love one another, to support our community, to be closer to the divine. That's the ultimate litmus test. So as we leave this mountain of obedience, we can take this understanding of the divine command with us and apply it when in doubt. Love, mutual support, courage, caring, these are God's commands to us. In all God's names, amen.
Amen.